This is Jack Tiernan, broadcasting from research vessel Seraphim, anchored 28 nautical miles west of St. Lawrence Island in the Bering Sea. Local time is 3:12. If you're hearing this, then either the relay node is still holding, or we've truly reached the end and someone finally cracked open the archive. I was an energy analyst once, trained at McGill, worked for an NGO that tracked pipeline construction and crude futures. My specialty was crisis modeling. I spent most of 2026 warning governments what would happen if the global energy treaty collapsed. I guess I was right, and nobody cared. Now let me take you back to November 5th, 2027 to Berlin. The warning signs were subtle at first. Russia restricted gas flows through the Jamal-Europe pipeline again, claimed internal pressure anomalies, but anyone paying attention saw it for what it was: leverage. Berlin downplayed it. But every embassy knew what the move really meant. They'd done it before, during the 2006 gas crisis. They were testing response times. Next came the sudden withdrawal of Norway from the treaty. Quiet, efficient, diplomatic. They cited resource preservation for future generations. That was spin. The truth? They'd discovered a new reserve under the Barents Shelf, and they didn't want to share. The treaty, ratified in 2021 after the second OPEC crash, was built on a thin idea that the world's superpowers and key producers could regulate fuel distribution during climate emergencies. Nations received quotas, export lanes, and renewable energy support. It was a noble fantasy. But once food prices rose and winter forecasts came in colder than expected, alliances frayed. By mid-November, I was reassigned to a North Pacific monitoring station aboard the Seraphim. Our job was to scan seafloor telemetry, measure undersea gas fields, and send regular condition reports to the International Energy Stabilization Committee. But even before the uplink started failing, we could feel the tension in the air. The day the treaty broke for good was December 2nd. A full embargo on Venezuelan oil was suddenly lifted by China, without consultation. Western navies repositioned within hours. The Panama Canal was declared off-limits to military-aligned tankers by U.S. command. Then came the strikes. The HMS Corbin was hit just south of Cartagena. Iranian commandos seized a tanker convoy in the Strait of Hormuz. Algeria cut power exports to Europe, and then the pipelines began blowing up. Sabotage, they said. Environmental extremists, but I saw the reports. 3 sites in Algeria, 2 in Turkmenistan, 1 deep in Alberta's tar sands. Multiple origins, synchronized. This wasn't protest, it was policy by other means. That night on the Seraphim, our uplink to Anchorage flickered and died. The emergency satellite still works, barely. That's why I'm broadcasting now. Not because I have orders. There's no chain of command left for me. I'm doing this because someone needs to know how it started. Not the headlines, the real story. Because when winter truly sets in across the northern hemisphere and the blackouts begin, it won't be bombs that break us. It'll be diesel shortages, natural gas hoarding, frozen pipes, power outages at maternity wards, ventilators shutting down, water treatment plants falling offline. Energy was never just economics. It was stability, civilization's heartbeat. And now, we've severed the artery. I'll keep talking until I lose the line. I've got food for 3 weeks, batteries for longer, and enough field recordings to reconstruct the whole timeline. Names, locations, data. You'll hear it all. If you're out there, if you found this frequency, record this, archive it, pass it forward. Because someday, when they try to rewrite what happened, they'll start with words like conflict or military escalation. But I was there, and I know. It began with fuel. This is Jack Tiernan, still broadcasting from the Seraphim. Local time is now 5:40. I've rerouted power through the backup capacitors and isolated the satellite relay. Everything's running hot, but stable for now. If this burns out the transceiver, so be it. If anyone hears this, you need to understand what really triggered the Third World War. It wasn't a nuke, wasn't a flag. It was fuel, not just fuel as in barrels and tankers. I mean access flow control oil, gas, uranium, and power in the literal sense. Generators, grids, pipelines, the arteries of modern civilization. On December 4th, 2027 at 2:08, everything broke. Berlin again was first. I have the transmission. Recovered from the ISC packet logs before the uplink failed. You're going to hear it raw. Background static, shouting, sirens. Listen. No, don't tell them it's isolated. It's not. You're lying to their faces. Get Bundesnetz on the line. Grid 6 just fell. That's 6 million homes. It's not sabotage. It's... Hello? Hello? Oh God. They cut us. That was the Brandenburg Operations Center. Less than 5 minutes later, Germany declared a national power emergency. Russia responded not with aid, but with the closure of Nord Stream 2's residual valves. No gas moved westward. That same morning, Poland lit up troop movement alerts. By 5 o'clock, they were deploying armored rail transports toward Kaliningrad. NATO classified it as a precautionary escalation. Everyone was scared and trying not to blink first, but the blink came from Seoul. At 6:12, South Korea's Ministry of Defense issued a scrambled broadcast accusing China of jamming merchant marine beacons near the Yellow Sea. Civilian tankers had gone missing, hijacked, or diverted to Chinese ports. Here's what the emergency channel picked up, broadcasted by a South Korean naval officer. I've cleaned the audio. Listen. Civilian vessel Everlight Dawn confirms radar jamming from multiple vectors. No response from Chinese Coast Guard. We are assuming hostile intent. Seoul requests an immediate NATO confirmation. Is the blockade protocol authorized? Repeat. Is blockade protocol authorized? There was no reply, because 6 minutes earlier Washington, D.C. had gone offline. I don't mean power loss. I mean dark. Off the grid. Black bag scenario. Emergency continuity protocols activated. All federal communications transferred to Cheyenne Mountain, NORAD, bunkers. Why? Because something detonated just outside Baltimore. Not a warhead, an electromagnetic pulse device. Dirty but precise. Shut down regional communications, disrupted the eastern seaboard's electrical grid, and corrupted 2 satellite uplinks. Blame flew instantly. Iran, Russia, even domestic militias. No one knew. Everyone guessed. France declared Article 5 readiness under NATO Charter. Russian troops crossed the Suwalki Gap between Kaliningrad and Belarus. China launched anti-ship missiles into the South China Sea, targeting what they claimed were foreign extraction vessels conducting illegal resource raids. Pakistan lost contact with 2 nuclear facilities after a cyber attack rerouted their grid's cooling systems. Brazil nationalized all fuel imports and deployed police to control refineries, days before Sao Paulo's first major riot. That was the quick start of World War III. It wasn't the launch of nukes, not yet. It was faster than that. Dumber, too. It was phone calls not returned, fuel contracts voided by silence, border crossings by soldiers pretending they were exercises, trigger-happy commanders, algorithmic targeting systems gone haywire, a billion-dollar diplomacy network fried in a morning, and with it, the world's ability to pause. Let me give you an example from the Southern Hemisphere. People always forget what happens outside the NATO sphere. Here's a civilian distress call pulled from Sao Paulo's shortwave band hours after martial law was declared. This was broadcast from a rooftop radio at Avenida Paulista. You can hear the chaos in the background. We need insulin. The blackout shut down cooling. My sister's going into shock. The pharmacy was looted. Please, we're on the roof of the Sao Paulo Business Center. We have clean water. We are not armed. Please, just... Gunshots, glass breaking, then silence. We received 9 such transmissions that night. None repeated. By December 5th, most of Europe had activated wartime fuel reserves. These weren't just for tanks or jets. These were heating reserves, hospitals, sewage systems, everything downstream from electricity. And here's the twist. Most of those reserves were managed through the Global Energy Treaty. The legal framework that made all this sharing possible. Gone. Every shipment now became a liability. Every pipeline a contested front line. Even nations not directly in combat started turning inward. Export bans, food protectionism, energy tariffs at choke points. Some tried to stay neutral. India, Argentina, Canada. But the logistics broke anyway. There's no neutrality when the system collapses. We, on the Seraphim, were told to maintain observational silence, but we kept listening, kept recording. That's why I'm reading you this now. Because nobody's going to tell this story straight. Not when the leaders start dying. Not when the alliances fracture. Not when the maps change again. This wasn't the big one, like the pundits used to joke. There was no mushroom cloud over a city skyline to make it easy to remember. It was a death by severance, and the fuse was cut by greed and heat and the refusal to share the last bucket of diesel. This is how it begins. And in the next broadcast, I'll tell you how the United Nations fell, not with a vote, but with a strike against a humanitarian convoy in Ukraine captured in real time by an amateur ham operator in Bucharest. Because that convoy, it wasn't just bombed, it was used. And that's where the war truly changed shape. Keep your radios open. Keep your batteries charged. We're just getting started. Jack Tiernan, broadcasting again from the Seraphim. Position unchanged. Signal is weak, but we're holding steady. Local time, 7:22. If you've been following, you know now that World War III didn't start with a bang. No singular weapon or speech, no global declaration. It started when systems we relied on to hold civilization together, energy, diplomacy, coordination, failed in quick succession. But that was only the beginning. Today I'm going to tell you about the UN convoy incident. It wasn't the most violent act of the first days, but it was the one that shattered the illusion that anyone, anywhere, was still protected by neutrality. The UN called it Convoy 728 EG, a joint humanitarian effort tasked with delivering winter medical supplies and fuel stabilizers to a refugee camp in Vinnytsia, central Ukraine. At least that's what the manifest said. I first heard about the convoy from a burst transmission relayed through a ham station in Bucharest. The operator's name was Doran Ionescu, a retired telecom engineer who kept the Cold War-era Soviet transceiver in his basement. The model, R140, still had vacuum tubes, EMP resistant. The guy had a habit of scanning emergency frequencies when insomnia kicked in. What he picked up that night wasn't encrypted, wasn't even professional. It was terror on open air. Here's his original recording. I've clipped the noise floor to preserve the urgency. Repeat, we're UN Convoy 728G, not armed, blue flags visible. I count 3 drones overhead. No, 4. They're not signaling IFF. We have civilians. I repeat, we have civilians. Please respond. Anyone. The drones are... That tone was not interference. It was a signature. A known signal used by a specific class of Russian Orion 2 drones to indicate a target lock in autonomous mode. Meaning, someone had set those machines loose with full autonomy. No human confirmation required. The convoy was annihilated 11 minutes later. 8 transport trucks, 47 UN personnel, dozens of civilian volunteers, all incinerated just outside of Uman. The official story? The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed the convoy was a Western intelligence decoy used to smuggle NATO surveillance drones into occupied Luhansk. They said the trucks had emitted unauthorized encrypted beacons, likely true, but only because UN trucks had been fitted with rudimentary anti-GPS spoofing gear to avoid being misidentified. Of course, the UN denied everything. NATO called the strike barbaric. Russia refused to apologize. China abstained from comment. And the Geneva Channel, supposed to be the secure hotline for humanitarian deconfliction, had already gone silent. Its relay nodes in Bern and Istanbul had been quietly disabled the night before in a targeted cyber strike traced to an IP block once used by an Estonian defense contractor. No one ever proved who really did it. But I want you to understand the implications. Until that moment, the world still clung to the idea that some zones were off-limits, that civilian convoys bearing UN flags were immune, that old treaties and protocols still mattered. This proved otherwise. From that day on, no one wore blue helmets. No one painted white flags on roofs. Refugee camps started burying their tents under tarps. Aid stations stopped broadcasting their coordinates, because being seen meant being targeted. The world watched what happened to Convoy 728G. And from that silence came madness. That same day, the UN's Geneva headquarters was evacuated. A protest outside turned violent. Not local, foreign agents. Masked, coordinated. They broke through the line, torched documents, destroyed servers. Swiss authorities issued an arrest warrant for a known Serbian extremist leader, but he was never found. What matters is this: by the end of that week, 4 more convoys were hit. 1 in Moldova, 2 in Syria, 1 outside of Kabul. And not a single attacker was ever identified. Because in this war, no one claimed the kills. That's what made it different. This wasn't the Cold War redux. It wasn't about taking land or proving strength. This war was about denial. Of power. Of movement. Of truth. Now let me tell you what happened to Doran. After he intercepted the transmission and shared it with a few closed-list forums, he disappeared. His amateur station went offline 2 days later. His last message was a single text ping to a Polish server hosting open-source war logs. It read, "They came, no uniforms, just asked for the tapes." I saved everything he uploaded. I have his files here, and in case this signal reaches another broadcast tower, I've rigged an auto-dump into the data stream. The logs will be attached. His name deserves to be remembered. So does the truth. Because if there's anything more dangerous than being caught between armies, it's being caught in a war where no one admits they're fighting. This is Jack Tiernan. Still here, still talking. Next broadcast, I'll take you inside what used to be one of the most secure energy coordination hubs in Europe, GEO-4A beneath Geneva, and explain how an engineer's suicide locked the continent into a permanent brownout cascade. You need to understand how power is rationed when the system's logic tree is corrupted, how countries fought not just over fuel, but over electricity routing algorithms. Because when GEO-4A fell, the lights went out in Vienna. And then came the looting. I'll be back in 2 hours. Jack Tiernan. Live from the Bering Sea. It's 10:02. Power's holding. Signal's clean. If you're still listening, if this signal's bouncing off a dish somewhere in the Yukon, or hitting some half-dead relay in Nunavut, this is for the record. For those who make it. For those who try again. Let's talk about power. Not political power, not abstract theory. I mean electricity, current, flow, the actual pulse of cities. You don't think about it until it's gone. But I've spent my career studying the fragility of grid systems, and I'm going to walk you through how a single suicide in Geneva caused the lights to go out across Central Europe. It started with GEO-4A, short for Grid Efficiency Oversight Node 4. Alpha built underneath Geneva in 2023 after the global blackouts of 21 and 22. GEO-4A was designed to regulate energy flow between 17 national grids, optimizing transfer loads across borders. It was an AI-assisted coordination hub. Think of it like a brainstem for the continent. It didn't just control power, it prioritized it. Hospitals over theaters, sewage treatment over commercial neon. During cold snaps, it rerouted megawatts from surplus zones in the south to the northern populations. But like any system, it had a vulnerability. It was only as strong as the logic trees written into it, and those were maintained by people. One of them was Cédric Malveau, a French-Algerian electrical systems engineer and ethics liaison to the IESC. He wasn't military, he wasn't even political, but he was one of 6 individuals who had Tier 2 root access to GEO-4A's command structure. Tier 1 was reserved for emergency override, but Tier 2 handled the daily triage. Cédric had a family in Lausanne, a wife, 2 kids. He'd worked in the energy sector for nearly 20 years, first in renewables, then systems design, known for being methodical, careful. But he made a mistake. On December 6th, after reviewing regional cold weather forecasts and noticing the diesel shortage alerts in Austria, he preloaded a routing directive that would transfer reserve hydroelectric power from northern Italy into Austria's primary and emergency health systems. It should have worked, but in his code he left one line unguarded, a loop that assumed all downstream municipal nodes would respond as active or standby. He never accounted for dormant, a legacy status from a now decommissioned Swiss data center. When GEO-4A executed the cascade, that loop misfired. Instead of feeding Austria from Italy, It interpreted Austria's health systems as inactive and rerouted power out of the hospitals and into the dormant node. It was like trying to irrigate a dead field and draining your reservoir in the process. Within 47 seconds, hospitals in Vienna, Linz, and Graz went dark. Elevators froze. Heart-lung machines shut off. ICU ventilators failed. Backup diesel generators never kicked in, because the diesel had been seized for military transport 2 days earlier. Over 1,100 patients died in 2 hours. By the time engineers noticed what had happened, the control interface had locked itself out. GEO4. A failsafe protocols interpreted the drain as a cascading overload threat and severed external manual override. Cedric tried to fix it. Logs show he accessed the backend code at 3:12 GMT, tried to manually patch the directive. At 3:27, he messaged another engineer. Can't get access. Locked out. We killed Vienna. I killed Vienna. At 3:41, he took the elevator down to sublevel 3. There are no cameras down there. But at 3:45, an internal vibration alert was registered. Security found his body beside the master junction relay. No sabotage, no protest. Just a folded note and a severed cable in his lap. His note read, "We were never meant to make these choices, but we built a god that thinks in volts." That's when the riots began. Within 6 hours, footage emerged of hospitals piling bodies into trucks. Not hearses, refrigerated meat trucks. Austria had no plan for that many dead in a peacetime city, no protocol. Citizens took to the streets, first for answers, then for fuel, then for food. The army tried to hold position, but too many soldiers had family in the dark zones, too many refused orders. 1 unit mutinied. 2 joined the protesters. The Austrian chancellor declared a state of war, but it wasn't against any external enemy. It was against operational negligence committed by foreign entities, resulting in civil mass casualty events. That phrase was used as a legal pretext to seize all incoming energy shipments, regardless of the country of origin. Germany responded by blocking further power exports to Austria. Switzerland shut its northern borders. And then, someone bombed GEO4A, still unknown who. Swiss intelligence claims it was a rogue pro-democracy faction inside Geneva. Retaliation for Cedric's death. Some say it was NATO contractors erasing liability. Others blame Russian-aligned sabotage units. The only thing that matters? The blast destroyed the data cores, the AI, the logs. GEO4EA was vaporized, and with it, Europe's last real shot at grid stability. I saw the thermal imaging reports on the Seraphim uplink. The Geneva crater glowed for 12 hours. Power allocation algorithms across the continent defaulted to nationalistic priority, every country for itself. That's when Spain began rationing electricity by surname. That's when the Netherlands flooded its own farmland to preserve hydroelectric integrity. That's when Hungary reactivated its coal plants without filtration, because poison air was better than freezing to death. This is what happens when you let a machine think for people, then punish it for human mistakes. This is what happens when the network of trust goes down before the towers do. And Cedric, he won't be remembered. But Vienna's darkness, that will echo for decades. In my next transmission, I'll walk you through the breakdown of the Red Line Corridor, the Trans-Eurasian freight passage that used to carry 40% of the world's refined fuel. You'll hear how it became a battleground between trains and drones, and why the last container to make it through carried not oil, but body bags. Keep recording. Keep listening. Because the truth didn't die, it just lost power. Jack Tiernan reporting again from the Seraphim. 12:13. Outside, ice fogs rolling thick across the deck. Solar inputs low, but I've rerouted through the internal chemical cell. Signals stable. No more stalling. Let's move forward. We've covered how the grids fell, how convoys were bombed, how trust evaporated between nations faster than the fuel they fought over. Now I need to tell you about the Red Line Corridor and what happened when the last overland fuel route between Asia and Europe became a war front, and how that battle brought us to the first tactical nuclear use in nearly 90 years. The Red Line Corridor was the name given to the Eurasian Transcontinental Freight Passage, a complex web of high-speed rail, pipeline easements, underground fuel tunnels, and cross-border logistic nodes stretching from Shenzhen to Rotterdam. It moved crude oil, refined fuel, lithium, rare earths, grain, even desalinated water. On paper, it was neutral, monitored by UN logistics teams, protected by a multilateral security charter signed by 27 countries. By mid-December 2027, none of that mattered. It began with drone harassment. Unmarked UAVs started trailing eastbound tankers near Samarkand. Then came track sabotage near the Kazakh-Russian border. Russia accused NATO-aligned groups of deploying magnetic explosives along fuel train routes. Turkey accused China of arming separatist cells near Van. Poland intercepted a train manifest showing lithium source from a restricted Congolese mine, sanction violating. Every nation had a grievance. What broke it all was Train 4097, bound for Budapest. It carried refined diesel fuel, emergency rations, and surplus radiation meds from East Asia. The manifest listed it as a rescue cargo priority line. It never made it past the Ural threshold, the massive supply checkpoint near Yekaterinburg. On December 17, 319, a tactical nuclear warhead, low-yield airburst class between 1.2 and 2 kilotons, was detonated just 4.7 kilometers west of the checkpoint. The sky lit up like it was noon. The blast vaporized Train 4097A, reduced the supply hub to slag, and sent a thermal shockwave into the airspace of 3 bordering countries. No one claimed the strike, but 5 hours later, China issued a Level 5 strategic response alert claiming it had exercised regional countermeasures against a hostile energy seizure threat. Russia denied any involvement, said the strike was unprovoked, an attack on peacekeeping infrastructure. The United States called the event an escalation beyond all acceptable boundaries, but never acknowledged satellite confirmation. Germany activated NATO's continuity of grid protocols, which meant all infrastructure deemed vulnerable to further attacks was considered military priority. Civilian access was cut off. Diesel shipments to non-military convoys were terminated across 5 borders. Overnight, the Red Line Corridor collapsed. And with it, nearly 40% of the world's east-west energy flow. Here's a recovered transmission from a Turkish station master outside Kars, moments after his hub received the nuclear warning alert from Moscow. The voice is shaky, the air sirens in the background. We've stopped all outbound cars, all of them. We're not risking it. No one wants to be the next crater. People are climbing the fences. They think we have food. We don't have anything. Just tell me. Was it real? Was it a nuke? Yeah, it was real. And it wasn't the only one. Within 2 days, India deployed a short-range tactical nuke over its own territory, Kargil district. They claimed a Pakistani insurgent group had seized control of an old border fuel depot and was attempting to reverse pump aviation fuel into a smuggling tunnel system leading across the LOC. The blast was surgical, topsoil incinerated, radiation exposure limited to a 4-kilometer radius. No foreign casualties. Pakistan denied the insurgent presence and placed 3 of its regional nuclear units on alert. For the first time since the 1999 standoff, both nations publicly armed their silos. The only thing that kept them from going full exchange was Iran stepping in. I have the clip, intercepted by a naval drone's open channel over the Arabian Sea. To all regional powers, escalation is a betrayal of our shared future. If a second nuclear device is used by anyone, we will regard it as an existential threat and will retaliate without restraint. This is not a bluff. This is the last promise. That warning worked. For about 4 days. Then came the incident in Lviv. Poland had been quietly moving chemical munitions near its eastern border. Old Cold War stockpiles, retrofitted for modern dispersal. Rumors spread that Ukrainian insurgents had attacked a mobile fuel lab near the outskirts. And that lab, according to 3 separate NATO defectors who uploaded reports before disappearing, may have been conducting unapproved field testing of microfission battery systems, a tech still in prototype phases. An explosion followed. Not nuclear, but enough to mimic the flash and yield of one. That fake-out triggered a Russian localized missile response this time, not nuclear, but highly enriched uranium bunker penetrators intended to incinerate hardened targets. Half of Lviv was leveled. It didn't matter that no warhead was involved. The world had crossed a threshold. You have to understand, these weren't strategic ICBMs. These were battlefield nukes, tactical warheads, designed for proximity and message sending. And by now, they were being used the way you'd use artillery. And no country would admit they started it. But every country wanted to be the one to finish it. The taboo was gone. That's when France began pulling tactical nukes from storage and aboard. When South Korea published its first non-denial about miniaturized payloads aboard KDX destroyers. When Australia signed a classified escalation clause with the US over Pacific fuel reserves. And when one more voice disappeared from the air. Her name was Mia Solberg, half Norwegian, half Korean, broadcasting out of a bunker in the Faroe Islands using an old coastal weather station's gear. She'd been relaying refugee locations, power outage maps, ferry routes still running. Her voice was steady, precise. Her last message was this: "They've cracked the comms. My signal's compromised. I'm hearing static where my own logs should be. If I stop broadcasting, it's because someone's listening and they don't want you to hear." And then, nothing. We never heard from Mia again. But I kept her logs. Her reports are saved. Her maps still work. Because she understood what I do. This isn't a war over nations anymore. It's a war over supply chains, over thermodynamic survival, over who gets to keep the lights on when the last drop of fuel is burned. In my next broadcast, I'll tell you what happened in Alaska when the pipelines froze and Fort Wainwright turned into a rogue state. You'll hear how America began to fracture from within, not from bombs, but from silence. Stay alive, stay awake, keep listening. Jack Tiernan, broadcasting from the Seraphim. 1455. The seas are calm, which is more than I can say for the world. I'm still alive. And so are you, if you're hearing this. Keep that in mind. Life, real life, is now the rarest currency on Earth. Today I want to talk about India, because while the world's attention was locked on Europe's collapse, on drone wars over the fuel corridors, on nukes in the Urals and propaganda in the Pacific, India imploded from the inside. A superpower split down the middle, not because of foreign enemies. Because of hunger, corruption, and cold. In the second week of January 2028, the energy situation across the subcontinent became untenable. Not a shortage, an absence India had long depended on a mix of imported crude, domestic coal, hydroelectric flow from the northeast, and nuclear plants scattered across the interior. But by the time international shipping collapsed and power exchange with Bangladesh was cut off, the country was burning anything it could find. What came next wasn't war, not at first. It was chaos. Here's how it began. The great shutdown of Gujarat, Ahmedabad. Once India's manufacturing heart went fully dark on January 9th. The Sabarmati thermal power station failed after its last shipment of imported coal was seized by a rogue naval unit off the Sri Lankan coast. With no diesel backup and no grid sharing from the north, the lights went out. So did the phones, and then the food chain. When the government attempted to send in the Indian Army to secure food depots and critical infrastructure, something happened that hadn't occurred in over 70 years of modern Indian statehood. The soldiers refused orders. Not out of treason, but survival. The families of many infantrymen lived in the same darkened cities they were ordered to suppress. Those men didn't fire on looters. They joined them. On January 12th, a full division of the 11th Infantry Battalion in Gujarat defected, not to another nation, to a cause, a resistance calling itself Janashakti, meaning people's power. They didn't wave flags. They didn't wear uniforms. They weren't calling for separation. What they demanded was energy transparency and the resignation of every single official in the Central Energy Regulatory Commission. They accused the government of hoarding diesel for bunkers and private corporate convoys. They released footage of politicians being flown by military drone to retreat estates in Himachal Pradesh, while hospitals in Patna were burning animal dung for heat. What began as a protest became an uprising, and India, a democracy of 1.4 billion, began to fracture. The northeast states, already embattled by separatist movements and denied grid access after a failed cyber attack on the Sikkim hydro complex, declared electrical independence. No more transfers south, no more deference to the national grid. Armed civilian militias led by regional energy engineers seized transformers, substation hubs, and solar array facilities. Their motto: power for the place it comes from. In Kerala, janitors and nurses at Thiruvananthapuram Medical College overran the last running generator facility after discovering it had been kept off to preserve status alignment. Within 2 days, 11 other state hospitals staged coordinated walkouts and seizures. They didn't attack soldiers. They simply kicked out administrators, barricaded the gates, and broadcast shortwave messages declaring independence from resource mismanagement. The real turn, though, came on January 18th in Lucknow. A train full of humanitarian supplies from southern India was rerouted, intentionally by Ministry of Rail Command. It was meant for Kanpur, but was redirected to an elite government sector outside Delhi. People found out, and then the 13th Mechanized Regiment stationed just outside the city turned their guns on the train. Not on civilians, not on rebels. On the train. They filmed themselves stopping it, cracking open the steel cargo doors. Inside were pallets of rations, boxes of thermal blankets, oxygen tanks, and, most damning of all, fuel cells designed to power mobile command shelters. One soldier stepped forward in full gear, removed his helmet, and said calmly into the camera, "We are not traitors. We are patriots, but we are not your tools. Our loyalty is to the people who freeze in the streets, not to the officials who bathe in electricity." That video went viral on closed darknet forums, on pirate LTE networks, on scavenged terminals and refugee zones. It didn't need to trend globally. It exploded locally, and that was enough. By January 20th, 5 Indian states were no longer under New Delhi's functional control. Roadblocks went up. Ammunition depots vanished. Entire police forces joined the rebellion. The government declared them terrorists, but it no longer had the logistical power to reach them. And then the world reacted. China, fearing a collapse along its shared border and a refugee spill into Tibet, deployed humanitarian stabilization units, unmanned ground drones with non-lethal riot suppression gear, at least at first. Within a week, reports emerged of targeted strikes on suspected rebel communication towers inside Indian territory. Pakistan declared strategic uncertainty and activated defensive protocols along the LOC. Their foreign minister issued this statement: "India is no longer a unified state. We reserve the right to protect our people from the fallout of a failed neighbor." And the United States? The president, sheltered in NORAD, authorized a Level 4 peacekeeping contingency, meaning open talks with rebel factions, supply drops to friendly regions, and observation satellites repositioned over the Deccan Plateau. That alone triggered what came next. The Indian government accused the U.S. of sponsoring insurrection. They responded by arming 2 of their remaining nuclear-capable submarines, bringing them out of deep dock and broadcasting their launch readiness on unencrypted channels. This wasn't deterrence anymore. It was posturing born of paranoia. And then on January 23rd, something unthinkable happened. A tactical nuclear detonation occurred in the Thar Desert, near the border with Pakistan, at a remote military base turned rogue. Yield estimated between 500 and 800 tons, sub-kiloton, clean, airburst. The Indian government blamed separatists trying to access stored warheads. The separatists said it was a false flag meant to unify the country by fear. No proof, no claim. Just a crater, a flash, and the death of any remaining faith in control. What followed was inevitable. China mobilized missile defense along Arunachal Pradesh. Pakistan elevated nuclear posture to stage 3. And U.S. satellites began tracking unauthorized movement in eastern Iran, suggesting new launch platform installations. All because a democracy broke beneath the weight of internal betrayal and energy collapse. I've been recording rebel transmissions, power ration notices, the chaos of a nation with too many voices and too little current. You'll hear them in the data dump that follows this broadcast. But hear this clearly. India was a keystone in global stability, and now it's split. The world just got smaller, more unstable, more flammable. In my next transmission, I'll bring you back to North America, because as India burns, the United States is beginning to tear itself apart, state by state, grid by grid. And when it breaks, there'll be no one left to play peacekeeper. Not anymore. Hold the line. Jack Tiernan, broadcasting from the Seraphim, 1731, UTC 11. Winds up. Starboard relays still holding. I've moved backup tapes to a sealed compartment in case I need to scuttle the rest. If you're still out there, if anyone hears this, know that the storm is no longer coming. It's here. And it's not just a world war anymore. It's a collapse of federation, of order, of memory. Tonight I'm talking about America, because while the world watched India fall into civil war, the United States of America, once the emergency backstop of global coordination, quietly broke apart behind its own borders. Not with tanks, not with bombs, but with silence. Let's go back. January 26th, 2028, 3 days after the detonation in India. The president had not been seen live in over a week. White House feeds were pre-recorded. Most top officials were bunkered inside Site R, the Raven Rock military complex beneath the Catoctin Mountains. The rest? Scattered across hardened shelters under NORAD command. The official story? Continuity of governance. In reality, the dissolution of practical control. It started with the Texas withdrawal. On January 28th, after days of rolling blackouts and diesel riots from Dallas to Laredo, the Texas Emergency Authority declared regional autonomy under the Lone Star Contingency Act, a dormant Cold War-era clause that was never intended to be used. The governor, surrounded by a bipartisan alliance of oil executives, state militia generals, and Southern Energy Co-op leaders, announced the seizure of all strategic fuel reserves within Texas state borders. This included the Strategic Petroleum Reserve Site near Bryan Mound, all private and public pipelines intersecting with the Houston Fuel Corridor, and the state-controlled portions of the ERCOT grid which powers 90% of Texas homes and businesses. No announcement was sent to D.C. Instead, it was broadcast through local emergency networks. Here's a clip, recorded from an intercepted VHF channel operating out of a former NOAA tower near San Antonio. We're not breaking away. We're holding the line. We will not export a single barrel of crude while our own citizens freeze. Texas will provide for Texans. Anyone attempting to interfere with grid autonomy will be regarded as a hostile actor. Federal troops were still stationed at key points across the state, but they were outnumbered and half refused orders. Many were local. Many hadn't been paid in weeks. Others simply went home. The federal government issued no official condemnation, because California had already started rationing power by class tier and Illinois was days into a silent strike by freight unions blocking access to vital cargo from the East Coast. D.C. had no bandwidth, no grid, and no leverage. Then came Alaska. At first, Alaska's resistance seemed benign, isolated, defensive. The cold up there is apolitical. It just kills. But on February 1st, satellite imagery confirmed that Fort Wainwright, the largest U.S. Army base in the state, had gone dark and hot. Thermal signatures showed infrastructure still running, but unconnected to the national command structure. Armed personnel were observed escorting fuel convoys away from the base into northern territories. 4 days later, Alaskan regional authorities received a packet from Wainwright Command declaring themselves Autonomous Strategic Zone 3. The memo stated, Due to federal disconnection, unprocessed resource bottlenecks, and the clear abandonment of Arctic defense policy, we are operating under self-sustaining authority. Fuel will be conserved for strategic functions only. All external queries will be considered potential cyber intrusion. That was a U.S. Army base, declaring independence, not out of ideology but survival. This triggered a domino effect. Montana issued a moratorium on outbound rail fuel shipments. Oregon activated its Civilian Defense Council and began publishing emergency food maps independent of FEMA. Florida's governor activated all state guard units and cut access to Atlantic liquefied gas ports for any out-of-state convoys. The Midwest Supply Highway, once the main artery for food and fuel across the heartland, was blocked by a coalition of truckers demanding regional fuel sovereignty. And the federal government? Cooking, still silent. Because its greatest weakness had been exposed, it was never built for energy war. The Department of Energy had no real enforcement arm. The National Guard was fractured. The Postal Service had long since ceased rural delivery. Even the emergency alert system, once the spine of coordination, had become unreliable, choked by conflicting regional command nodes and outdated firmware. In the absence of unity, militias filled the gap. In the Appalachians, a group calling itself the Smoky Mountain Syndicate took control of key substations and erected community power courts, rationing electricity based on civic contribution. Some say they were fair. Others say they used electric access as punishment for dissent. In North Dakota, ex-oil workers armed with salvaged mining gear and surplus weapons declared the creation of the Free Fuel Republic, demanding recognition as a strategic resource partner rather than a state. And in southern Arizona, a paramilitary outfit known only as the Borderline began siphoning reserve diesel from decommissioned military trucks and smuggling it across the Mexican border in exchange for clean water. And through all of it, the nukes stayed online. Minuteman silos in Colorado, Trident warheads aboard Ohio-class subs still unaccounted for, and mobile launch platforms in unknown locations. Each regional power claimed loyalty to the idea of the Union, but none answered to its authority. They all had fuel, they all had force, and they all had radios. I have intercepted dozens of regional command transmissions, coded, often clumsy, sometimes Ross with panic. Here's one out of Kansas, recorded February 6th. Do not attempt access to Silo Point 49. The grid is dead. The override is locked. This is not a drill. The command failsafe may engage without human input if it detects hostile incursion. For God's sake, turn around. Think about that. Automated nuclear response systems designed decades ago, now without oversight, and without grid feedback, meaning some of the most destructive weapons ever built are operating in algorithmic limbo. This isn't war between nations anymore. It's war between systems. Between machines with authority and humans without it, between grid zones and political shadows, between desperate regions who'd rather burn the sky than freeze beneath it. In my next broadcast, I'll tell you about New York City, once the crown of civilization. Now a flickering beacon on emergency power divided into borough states, each with its own militia, its own blackout laws, and its own definition of mercy. Because what happened there wasn't war. It was starvation made visible. Jack Tiernan. Seraphim Relay, 2002. I've got 3 hours of generator fuel left. After that, I'll shift to hand crank backup for shortwave only. The seas mirror flat. Strange quiet, like the world's holding its breath, waiting for the next global artery to burst. Let's talk about New York. Let's talk about what happens when a city that big, that hungry, that connected, disconnects. On February 9th, 2028, the last functioning direct feed into New York's outer grid, Line A, one from the Indian Point Decommission Reserve, tripped offline during an ice storm. It was supposed to be an auxiliary line. It became the city's final thread. The blackout spread from the Bronx in under 30 minutes. Con Ed was gone. State backup systems were reallocated weeks prior to priority zones around Washington. Federal response? Already gone dark after the Texas and Alaska split. And New York? It did what no one thought possible. It reverted. No cars, no elevators. No subway, no gas, no reliable food routes in or out, no law, at least not in the way we understood it. Each borough became its own fiefdom. Armed enclaves formed within hours, EMTs banded with fire crews. Retired cops joined with volunteer street patrols. Churches became ration stations. Rooftops became sniper nests. In Brooklyn, a group calling itself the Blackout Brotherhood took control of the Gowanus Transformer Yard. Their rules were simple. You work, you eat, you don't question where the power goes. They broadcast on a loop. We are the current now. Manhattan was different. The rich didn't evacuate fast enough. The poor were already used to lights out. The middle vanished. Wall Street turned into a ruin of abandoned town cars and office buildings lit only by flare stacks stolen from film sets. But it was Queens where things truly fell apart. Here's what I know. A state senator from Long Island tried to reassert jurisdiction by airdropping printed notices declaring the borough a federal infrastructure protection zone. The drop planes were hit by manpads, shoulder-launched missiles. Nobody ever found out who fired them. The truth? There were too many factions. One group was ex-military. One was a delivery union turned militia. One was just a neighborhood watch that decided it didn't want to stop watching. Each claimed power. Each hoarded fuel. Each blocked bridges. By the time a peace envoy, organized by what was left of the NYPD's Joint Operations Task Force, tried to reestablish communication, there were already body piles in 5 boroughs. I have a recording. Pulled from a mobile radio station operating out of a warehouse in Sunset Park. You can hear the desperation, the cold. We've got kids eating frozen dog food out of cans. A woman gave birth in a basement by flashlight. You tell me what America is now, Jack. You tell me if anyone's still in charge. I don't have an answer for her. Because New York isn't an exception, it's the template. And while cities burned and froze across the U.S., the world kept moving. Now, let's talk global. Europe. Europe is not a continent anymore. It's a map of competing energy zones, some openly hostile, some still pretending to cooperate. Germany and Poland are in a quasi-war border skirmishes, drone shootdowns, fuel truck seizures disguised as confiscations for stability. Neither side declares open war, but their people are dying just the same. France has gone completely isolationist. The Loire defense wall, originally designed for climate flood protection, has been militarized. Entry into the southern agricultural zones requires biometric clearance and a digital energy passport. Entire northern cities, Rouen, Lille, Amiens, are shut down. Lights off, no fuel. People are leaving in caravans on foot. Spain, split. Catalonia and Andalusia broke from Madrid in what they call energy secession. They've struck separate fuel deals with North Africa, primarily Algeria. The central government's too weak to stop them, not with their own pipelines ruptured, not with Galicia burning from arson riots started by ex-power workers demanding months of back pay and heating oil. And the UK? Gone dark. After a short-lived coalition government collapsed under cyber-attack pressure, Scotland declared energy independence and cut grid ties. The North Sea platforms are offline or captured. London flickers on and off. There are rumors of ferry piracy in the Channel, fishing vessels armed with antique rifles stealing diesel drums at sea. Europe's just a carcass now. The arteries are snapped. The organs are fighting over heat. Africa. Africa is moving, literally. Over 18 million people have started migrating northward toward the Mediterranean basin. Not for war, not for politics, for survival. The Sahara has become an open corridor. Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, once transit zones, are now front lines. Algeria sealed its southern borders and turned the Hassi Armel gas complex into a militarized zone. Convoys trying to reach it are shelled on sight. Egypt, bolstered by remaining Sino-backed desalination plants and solar farms, has become a gatekeeper state. Anyone without power clearance or digital rations is turned away or disappeared. But Ethiopia? That's where the global flashpoint is forming. Because Ethiopia has hydromassive infrastructure from the Grand Renaissance Dam, enough to power half the Horn, if it were shared. But it's not. Civil war broke out in early February, not tribal this time. Resource-based grid control, dam custody, satellite-guided militias fighting over power junctions. And Sudan responded by targeting border substations, airstrikes, suicide drones. Egypt, watching its access to Nile flow control threatened, moved troops south. And then came the quote from a military commander in Cairo. If the dams are taken, the lights of Cairo go out. We will not let that happen. Whatever means are required will be used. Interpret that how you want. The IAEA is tracking possible warhead movement within Egypt's older storage depots. No confirmation. But none of this needs confirmation anymore. Because the world has stopped waiting for permission, Asia-Pacific, China is consolidating. Still no full declaration of war, but their Belt and Road Defense Corridor is active. That means automated convoys under military escort, drone-saturated airspace, and lethal enforcement of energy trade routes from Myanmar to Kazakhstan. They've walled off Xinjiang, no traffic in or out. They've fortified the South China Sea with stationary energy towers armed with laser-guided defense systems and floating nuclear reactors. Taiwan, officially neutralized. A full blackout island. No net, no sat, no trade. Its population is invisible now, forgotten. Australia's cut its international shipping lanes. Internal rationing only. Foreign aid cut off. Their west coast, flooded. Their east, burning. Their middle, silence. And the global north? Canada is under martial law. Scandinavian states are operating under mutual blackout protocols, meaning they've agreed to take turns having power. 3 days on, 3 days off. The Arctic is warmer than Berlin. And Greenland? Greenland's melting fast, its ice sheet destabilized by atmospheric soot from so many burning substations across Europe and Asia. They say black ice absorbs more heat. That's not a metaphor. I have more to say, but the fuel cell's dropping, and I need to save enough power for the data burst that follows this. In the next transmission, I'll tell you about what's happening in orbit. Because yes, the satellites are falling, not all at once, but enough to change the shape of the sky. And with them goes the last thing holding global truth together: time. This is Jack Tiernan. Still here, still signal, still hope. Okay, no generator left. I'm running this off the hand-cranked alternator and what's left of the solar capacitor. The cold's setting in. I've sealed the lower deck. My dog, she's curled beside the receiver. She knows something's wrong. Maybe she hears the sky cracking. Because that's what's happening. The war isn't just down here anymore. It's up there too. We're losing space. Not in theory. Not in the poetic sense. Physically. Mechanically. Chronologically. It started as shadows. Tiny irregular flickers in the orbital path logs. Objects behaving strangely. Accelerations that shouldn't be possible without internal propulsion. Drift corrections made at odd intervals. Then the silence. Satellites began going dark. At first, the losses were written off as technical failures, aging units, debris strikes, solar storm anomalies. But when DoD Area Sat 45, a classified U.S. communications satellite, broadcast a distress ping on a long-defunct military band, people started asking questions. The ping lasted 6 seconds. It repeated once. And then the satellite deorbited, crashing into the Pacific just 320 nautical miles from where I sit now. Its burn-up trajectory was consistent with intentional retro-thrust activation. Someone sent it down, or something. Within 48 hours, 5 more satellites vanished. Not failed. Vanished. Signal lost. No debris recovered. No transmission trail. It was like something up there switched them off. And that's when the timekeepers started to panic. You may not realize this, But the entire system of global time, UTC, GPS, satellite-based coordination, relies on a network of synchronized orbital clocks. Lose those? You lose everything. Missile warning systems, high-frequency trading platforms, power grid, load balancing, emergency communications synchronization, and aircraft navigation. On February 14th, the European Space Agency issued an internal red alert, chronodrift critical, meaning the master clocks in orbit had begun to fall out of sync, less than a second at first, then 2, then 4. Tiny discrepancies, but at global scale they were catastrophic. I have a decoded burst from ESA's Deep Comms archive, decrypted by a retired astrophysicist in the Andes, who still had one of the old Galileo uplinks. Here's what they wrote. Time drift across independent satellite clusters now exceeds 3.3 seconds. Multiple constellations responding with redundant synchronization protocols. If all clusters collapse to internal logic, coordinated world time ceases. If UTC fails, you lose Earth's metronome. That's not poetic language. That's engineering. They were talking about the collapse of coordinated time. And that's already happening. Here's how I know. The International Space Station has been silent for weeks. Last confirmed contact was February 7th via a downlink intercepted by a private Argentinian weather relay. Not NASA, not Roscosmos, not ESA. A private relay. Here's the voice. A woman, calm, focused, tired. Her name is Commander Irina Park, South Korean aerospace engineer on her second orbital rotation. She speaks English here. This is Commander Park, requesting time confirmation. Our onboard clocks disagree by 6.7 seconds. Guidance systems misaligned. External reorientation incomplete. Solar array delta at 15 degrees off axis. We are not receiving from Houston or Moscow or ESA. ISS is not dead, but we are alone. Repeat, we are alone. That was the last signal. Telemetry suggests the ISS has since rotated 3 times off normal attitude. Orbital maintenance is slipping. And with fuel reserves depleted and resupply impossible, the station is drifting. If you think that doesn't matter, consider this. The ISS has long been one of the most significant observation platforms for both meteorological and defense systems. Its loss doesn't just mean a lab falls out of the sky. It means we go blind. It means we lose direct verified non-national sensor tracking of upper atmosphere conditions, orbital debris, military launches, weather anomalies, and UV fluctuation. It means we only see what someone else wants us to see. The U.S. military, still operating satellites, but they're focused on themselves. Their remaining Starlink clones, contracted under emergency defense terms, are locked into encrypted mesh networks. No public feeds, no cross-nation coordination. Yet, China claimed their Tiangong station was functioning within nominal parameters. That's propaganda. Analysts monitoring thermal emissions say the platform's energy output has decreased by 68% in 10 days. Most likely in power-saving orbit, drift. Russia, silent. Their GLONASS satellites are failing one by one. The last one over Siberia sent a position fix error so drastic it placed Irkutsk in the Indian Ocean. Nobody can tell where anything is anymore. I mean that literally. With GPS satellites dropping offline or conflicting ground-based navigation is failing. Planes crash. Drones misfire. Ballistic missiles go off course and disappear over oceans. Or, worse, re-enter their own nation's airspace. On February 15th, a strategic defense system in Romania launched an interceptor at what it believed was an inbound missile. It was actually a drifting Chinese orbital fragment tumbling at 18,000 miles per hour. It hit nothing. But the launch triggered a retaliatory alert from Turkey, who armed their own air defenses, who spooked Greece, who launched drones into the Aegean Sea. 4 people died on a yacht that day because a satellite was drifting, because the clock in the sky was wrong, because no one knew what time it was. We've always thought time was a constant. We forgot it's a technology, and now it's failing. There's something else. I debated whether to say this, but I promised I'd speak plainly. Some of the missing satellites? They didn't just vanish. They were taken. I don't mean aliens, I mean humans, or something like humans. Because last week, a private Australian station using a jury-rigged infrared array captured what they claimed was an orbital object changing velocity, mid-drift, no thruster flare, no known engine. It simply altered course. Then, radio silence. Maybe it was an artifact. Maybe not. But if someone up there is still moving, they're choosing what stays and what falls, and we're not invited to choose. Next time, I'll tell you about the final meltdown of the international internet backbone, and how humanity's shared memory is being eaten alive by silence, electromagnetic storms, and deliberate erasure. Because without satellites, there's no time. And without time, there's no truth, I remember. And I'll keep speaking. Even after the sky goes dark. Jack Tiernan. This is the final transmission. 3:22. Power's down to a trickle, winds howling across the deck. The Seraphim's hull groans with every shift in the ice. If I don't finish this, the uplink dies with me. But if you're still listening, then I want you to hear how the world truly ended. Not with fire, not with blood, but with silence, and one soft mechanical breath. Let me begin with what disappeared first. No, the internet. We were warned. The satellite sync failures, the drifting clocks, the orbital decay. But no one expected the memory of humanity to die so quietly. It began with regional nodes flickering offline. At first, people thought it was censorship, civil wars, infrastructure sabotage. But it wasn't just politics. It was decay, fiber optic lines, unmaintained, froze or burned. Undersea cables, those arteries between continents, snapped from unmanned icebreakers ramming into relay buoys. Routing tables corrupted. DNS servers fell out of sync. Redundancies failed. Then came the packet storms, the final glitch storms, when millions of outdated, unsynced, and malformed packets flooded the backbone in waves. The internet, once global, became tribal. Local nodes formed isolated webs. Emergency mesh networks, phone trees, radio bridge lands, data hoarders shared fragments, old Wikipedia dumps, salvaged archives, broken code libraries. But the live, breathing network, the pulse of humanity's shared memory, was gone. And into that void, lies poured in. Each region claimed their own truth, their own history, their own timestamp. Without satellites, without sync, without trust, nobody knew what day it was. Time unraveled. And when time dies, so does truth. That's when the data wars began. Not between countries, but between survivors. Roving tech cults armed with hard drives. Drones scavenging server farms. Hacker factions rewriting old archives to position themselves as saviors or gods or origin points. In New Delhi, they rewrote the Indian constitution with AI-generated fragments and called it the New Dawn Accord. In Ukraine, a rogue radio station declared its own timestamp the world's official clock, claiming their midnight was now the beginning of year one. But none of it mattered anymore, because everything that connected us had come undone. The final voice I heard before now came from a relay tower in northern Sweden. The broadcaster's name was Helena Forsmark, a former cryonics researcher turned survivalist. She had one solar panel, 2 car batteries, and a hand-built VLF antenna stretching from pine to pine. She wasn't trying to warn anyone. She just talked. Here's what she said. The trees are frozen to the core. The northern lights haven't stopped in 3 weeks. I saw a bear walking sideways yesterday. I think it was blind. There's no more digital calendar. No news, no planes. I've started naming the days after sounds. Today is the day of the thin ice whistle. I hope someone remembers that. I saved that message, and then she went dark. Let me tell you now what happened next. What you've waited for. Because the world doesn't end with a nuclear launch. It ends with the knowledge that the launch cannot be stopped. March 3rd, 2028. No exact time. Because by then, no one had time. The last functioning U.S. early warning radar, Station K9 Bravo in the Alaskan interior, detected a launch signature in the North Pacific. A single heat bloom, rapid acceleration, cold phase ignition. One missile, no ICBM signature, no fleet alert, no public statement. Just a quiet local launch from somewhere deep in the Pacific. Possibly a submerged platform. Possibly an auto-triggered fallback system. It wasn't a show of force. There was no parade, no declaration. It wasn't a first strike. And there was no retaliation. There wasn't time. There wasn't even awareness. Most of the world's nuclear detection systems were gone, corrupted, or in contested hands. The missile passed through dead skies, unsensed, untracked. Until a Chinese ocean-based sensor buoy, the last of its kind, caught the plume just before it vanished into the stratosphere. No one knows where it landed. Some say it was a safety release designed to self-destruct above the atmosphere if guidance failed. Others say it had no target, just coordinates hard-coded into a now extinct launch doctrine. One final flash. High above the clouds, unwitnessed, unclaimed, unanswered. That was the last moment I can confirm the world was still the world. After that, only fragments. Now it's just me, and the ocean. And this voice, fading into static. I don't know how long we'll last, but I've placed the Seraphim on a drift trajectory toward what's left of the Aleutian chain. If this transmission reaches someone, anyone, there's an auto beacon in the buoy locker, solar-powered, tagged with every frequency I've ever used. Find it. Because it holds all the tapes, every broadcast, every voice, every truth I've captured since the lights went out. It may not save the world, but it may help the next one start over. This is Jack Tiernan, broadcasting for the last time. From a boat with no fuel, beneath a sky with no satellites, in a world with no map. I remember you. I remember us. We tried. Goodbye.